Hi, I'm Alan Rosenberg, and welcome to another edition of The Alan Rosenberg Show. I think most people would agree that Mick Jagger is probably the greatest frontman in the history of rock and roll. He's certainly the archetypal frontman. I certainly think he's the greatest there ever was. But if you don't think he's the greatest, he's certainly way, way up there. He's also, of course, very much responsible for making the Rolling Stones, if not the greatest rock and roll band in the world, certainly one of the biggest rock and roll band in the world for 50 years and going to be going on 60 years. But what sometimes is forgotten or not really mentioned is that Jagger is one half of one of the greatest songwriting duos in the history of music, Jagger Richards. And Jagger is very much responsible for a lot of the greatness of the Rolling Stones and those songs. You'll hear Keith Richards getting interviewed, and not taking anything away from Keith Richards. But they'll say, oh, you wrote Satisfaction, and he'll tell the story. He woke up in a hotel room, and he had the riff on the cassette. And he kind of conveniently forgets to mention that he created that incredible riff. But it took Mick Jagger to take that riff and write those amazing lyrics and melody and create I Can't Get No Satisfaction. So Jagger is sometimes forgotten in the sense of what an incredible songwriter he is. So today's show is going to be talking about Mick Jagger's solo career because it's completely overlooked, doesn't get much critical respect, wasn't hugely successful commercially, but I will tell you there's a lot of really good music out there, Mick Jagger solo. So today on the Alan Rosenberg Show, let's talk about Mick Jagger solo. And it all starts here, back in 1969 with this really cool 45 with a song called Memo from Turner. Memo from Turner is the song that he does in his first motion picture role performance, which was this. And Performance is one of the all-time great British movies. This is the DVD of it. I just love this movie. And I'm fortunate enough to have it on two versions on Laserdisc, which you may be interested in seeing. Here's the pan and scan version. And this is the letterbox version. And Performance is one of my favorite movies. But I will tell you that not because Jagger is the star of it. Actually, James Fox is the better part of the movie. But highly recommended movie to see. It's kind of a split in two movies about a British gangster, and then he hides out at this bohemian rock star's residence, which is Mick Jagger, who kind of plays himself in a way. But it's a really great movie. Memo from Turner is an amazing track, and if you have never heard Memo from Turner, that 45 I showed you, you have to hear it. So check that out. It's from Performance. There's also a version on Metamorphosis, which is a different version on the Stones compilation, but this original Jagger solo single back in '69 is what started it. His second role, oh, and by the way, if you want to see, here's the vinyl version of Performance. And that's what he looked like in the movie. Great soundtrack, too. His second role in the movie back in '69 was Ned Kelly. This is the vinyl version of that album. And he plays the title character, Ned Kelly, pretty much as a straight acting role. And he does a fine job. I think that movie's pretty good. Doesn't get that much respect. So that was, he does a song in that movie called The Wild Colonial Born, which he actually did live on his one solo tour in Australia, which was way cool. And it's kind of an Australian folk tune. But that's all. This soundtrack is pretty much Waylon Jennings. But that's kind of a cool one. And then we could skip along to 1978. Jagger still doesn't have a solo career, just those two movies. And he does this duet with Peter Tosh called You Got to Walk and Don't Look Back. That's the 45. Came from the Bush Doctor album. That is a great duet. He actually appeared on Saturday Night Live that year as Peter, surprise guest to Peter Tosh being live, and it's great. So if you've never heard You Gotta Walk and Don't Look Back, the duet with Peter Tosh, that's a great cover, and you need to hear that. Let's keep going. 1984, he did this song, State of Shock, which was on the Jacksons album. like the Jacksons from the Jackson Five, and Jagger trying to start going solo a little bit. Stones are in disarray, and he does "State of Shock," a duet with Michael Jackson. Definitely not one of the high points of his career. Here's the 12-inch version of that song as well. So, but he's starting to touch, a little bit into getting solo, and the Stones are in disarray. And now we go to 1985, and it's Live Aid. And in 12 hours, him and his friend David Bowie, his buddy, they decide to do something for Live Aid, and they cut Dancing in the Street. A very quickie 45. That's the 45 version of it. And then here's a 12-inch version of it. And this was for Live Aid. And it was actually a pretty big hit. I think in England it may have been a #1 hit, but it's kind of a non-essential song. So far, if you're keeping track, you want to hear Jagger solo, Memo from Turner is the essential one so far. But now Jagger says he's going to try to go solo. The Stones signed a new contract with CBS Records. Part of the deal is he's going to try a solo career. The Stones are completely in disarray, and the solo career does not bode well with Keith Richards at that time. And he does his first solo album, which is, he actually releases his first solo single from the album. The album is She's the Boss, and he releases Just Another Night. And that was his first solo song. That's the 7-inch. Here is the 12-inch. I have a couple of copies of that. And, of course, back in those days in the 80s when they did the 12 inches, they'd have the extended remix, the radio edit, and all these different versions, and that's why I was collecting the 12 inches. Some of them are pretty good, some of them not. But She's the Boss is Jagger's first official solo album, and here it is. Got the hype sticker on there, includes Just Another Night, Hard Woman, Half a Loaf, Lucky in Love, Lonely at the Top. Again, the Stones kind of in disarray. 2 years earlier, they had released Undercover, which is an album I really liked, but was not a #1 big hit that the Stones were used to. And I was looking, the Stones were really not on shaky ground. I'm looking forward to Jagger's solo career. So here it is on CD, She's the Boss. Not a great cover, but Jagger's artwork on his covers, this is one of the better ones, actually. The thing about She's the Boss, it's suffers from that 80s sound. 80s music is so dated, in my opinion, and this album also has a lot of a dated sound. Just Another Night was the hit single, not a huge hit. It had one part in it that I really liked when it goes to the guitar solo. Instead of a typical kind of electric lead guitar solo, they do a nylon string guitar solo, and it works really well. But the album's got, a lot of guests and a mishmash of different songs on there. It starts off with Lonely at the Top, which is the only song on there credited to Jagger Richards. So it's kind of like a Stones leftover, I guess, although I've never heard a Stones version of it. I do have a bootleg of the Stones that has a song Lonely at the Top, but it's not this one. Goes into Half a Loaf, which is kind of a fun song. Running Out of Luck is not that good. Turn the Girl Loose. I was in school in Albany in '85 when this came out, and the radio station there was playing that song all the time. I thought it was the worst song on the album. But there's a couple of really good tunes on this album. Lonely at the Top's good, but it's dated. Half a Loaf is kind of a fun song. The second single on the album was this one called Lucky in Love. This is the 12-inch version of it. And I thought this was a great song. Again, it suffers now from that 80s production, but you gotta put it back in its time period. In its time period, that's what the music sounded like. The 12-inch version was far superior, I thought, than the album version. And there's the 7-inch single version as well. The single version starts off almost a cappella. Yes, I'm lucky, boom. Really good. The album just kicks in with the riff, but it's got a good guitar riff. Again, there's guests on She's a Boss, Townsend and Jeff Beck play on the album, and this is a good track. Again, put it in perspective. If you play it, it's got like that 80s sound, but it's a good track. The coolest thing about She's the Boss, actually, I thought was the third single, which was never released because the album was not a big hit, is a song called Hard Woman. And Hard Woman at that time had the most expensive video ever made. So check out a YouTube video of Hard Woman. It's computer animated. At that time, was state of the art and it cost a fortune. And it's a great track. But on the album, there's of the album version, which is really good. The video version is a completely different version that has the band The Hooters as doing the music on it, and it's a completely different version of the song, and it works well. I think it's a lot slicker. But for whatever reason, they remastered "She's the Boss" and put it out. They never released that video version of "Hard Woman," and I love that song. What Jagger did for "She's the Boss," by the way, was he did a promo video, but it was like a movie, and it was called "Running Out of Luck," and here it is on Laserdisc. This is a Japanese version of it. It helped boost that album for me, be honest with you. I played She's the Boss a ton in 85, even into 86. I just fell in love with the record. It's not a perfect album. It's not a great album, but, I just liked the video was fun. Bowie at that time did this Jazzin' for Blue Jean extended video. This is really extended. It's like an hour movie, huge budget. But it makes some of those lesser songs on the She's the Boss album work even better because when you see them in the movie, they're good. The title track, She's the Boss, is a really fun song. She's the boss in bed. She's the boss in bed. It's a really funky tune, and he just goes off on it, and it's fun. And it's especially fun in the movie. So not a great movie, and there's a really horrible love scene with Ray Dawn Chong, who's the co-star in this movie, which I didn't like at all. But all of this stuff made She's the Boss, for me, a really fun listen. And for whatever reason, I still put on She's the Boss. So it's definitely worth a listen, especially you want to hear Lucky in Love, the 45 version. You want to definitely check out Hard Woman, the video version, and the album version is a great song too. And even the title track, She's the Boss, is kind of fun. So that was about 85. 88, he releases his, actually, in between there, he released another song. I forgot about this one. This was a song for the movie Ruthless People. And this is the 7-inch version of that. If you ever see the movie Ruthless People, it opens up with an animated, kind of looks like that. And it's the Mick Jagger solo song, Ruthless People. So this is the 12-inch version of that. And that's a really, good kind of song. Here's the album. So you could see everybody else who's on that album, the soundtrack album. Ruthless People. Really funky kind of a song. You got to put things in perspective. Mick Jagger solo, I personally take my hat off to him because he doesn't want it to sound like the Rolling Stones. What is the point of Jagger putting out solo stuff that sounds like the Rolling Stones? So a lot of his solo stuff doesn't get any kind of critical acclaim because it doesn't sound like the Stones. It's popish. It's different. It's some techno kind of stuff in there. But isn't that the purpose of going solo? You want variety. At least I do. And so She's the Boss was a pretty good hit, but not a huge hit. Now, 3 years later, he releases his second album, Primitive Cool. He starts it off with this song. Here's the single, the first single of Primitive Cool, and it's called Let's Work. Now, I'm going to tell you a story. I was working at a warehouse at that time, and when I was working, I would listen to the radio, and I remember the DJ saying, we're going to be preparing, after the commercial break, the new Mick Jagger song, Let's Work, and I was so excited because I hadn't heard it. And he played it, and I heard it, and then he did like a call-in and said, call in, what do you think of this song? And it was not a good response, and I agreed. To this day, I would say that Let's Work is probably the worst thing associated with Mick Jagger. It's just a horrendous track. It's a horrendous video. I don't like the sentiment, the sound of this dated. It's just a really lousy song. And it was the opening single to the Primitive Cool album. There's the original vinyl featuring the hit single, Let's Work, was not a hit, plus Say You Will and Throwaway. Now this album was produced by Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics. Jeff Beck, who's obviously one of the greatest guitarists of all time, is all over this album. But Let's Work was so bad that it literally killed that album, and the artwork didn't help. Um, with that said, it's not terrible. It's a pretty good album. I actually really like this album. It's not great. Although I'll tell you a funny story. I was at Amoeba Records with my best friend in California when I was visiting him. And the great thing about Jagger solo albums, you can get them at any used record store for really cheap, $1, $2, $3. And I saw it for like $3, and I was like, "Hey Mike, you got to pick up Primitive Cool. There's a couple of really great songs on there." And he picked it up and he played it, and he got mad at me. He's like, "Oh my God, did I waste $3 on that?" I'm like, "Really? There's some great songs on there." Well, he didn't think so. But I'm telling you, if you check out Throwaway, which is the first song, which has got Jeff Beck all over it, and here is the 12-inch version of that. That is the killer song, and that opens up the album. I thought that song was great, and it's got a great video. And then the next single was a song called Say You Will, which has got a slick kind of 80s sound, but it's a great song and a good video. Love this song, Say You Will. Again, it's got that 80s sound. You got to put it in perspective. The title track is kind of interesting, Primitive Cool. Cal Toes, a great rocker. And the last two songs especially, Party Doll. I think Mick Jagger is an incredible songwriter, and I love his country songs and I love his ballads, and Party Doll is way up there. In fact, Mary Chapin Carpenter, and I have the album, did a cover, and she named her album Party Doll and other favorites. That's how great that song is. And the other song there, War Baby, which is very reminiscent of Dire Straits' title track Brothers in Arms, is great. So, again, it's not a great album, but there's a lot of really good things on these albums. Jagger decided to do some solo touring, and he tested the waters by going to Japan and Australia. Stones had never played in Japan, and they are big Stones fans, so it was a good way to break into that market. He's never officially released these videos. Here's Jagger live in '88 with special guest Tina Turner comes out. And here's a bootleg 4 CD box set of Jagger in Australia. And he plays a ton of songs, does a lot of the solo stuff. Keith Richards and a lot of Stones fans make fun of these tours because they have a guy, Jimmy Rip, who's kind of doing the Keith Richards role. But he's playing Stone songs they had never played at that time, like One Hit to the Body, Harlem Shuffle, which was some dirty work. The Stones had never toured that by that time. Some deeper Stones tracks, Can't You Hear Me Knockin', had never been played before. And they were a great band. Simon Phillips was the drummer. And Jagger's solo tour at that time in Australia and Japan completely changed the Stones, because when they reformed a year later for Steel Wheels, it was a whole new Stones live show, totally based on Jagger's solo, with the backup singers. There's where Bernard Fowler and Cindy Mizell and the backup singers and the large band. The idea was to make a really tight band, and the Stones had always been a loosey-goosey band, and you could check out any Stones tour, and they're very different on every tour. But on Steel Wheels, totally based on Jagger's solo tour. And when I watched those videos of the Jagger solo tour, I thought they were great, because it was nice to see Jagger with a really tight band, because the Stones had never sounded like that. Now, in retrospect, when you watch it, you're like, oh, it's kind of like a knockoff of the Stones, circa Steel Wheels Voodoo Lounge. But no, it was the reverse. Jagger did it first solo and then changed the Stones to match that to be a really tight, humongous stadium band. And that's what he did. When he played in Japan solo, he played like multiple nights at the Japan baseball stadium, holding 50,000 people a night. So, he had some success there, but never played solo. He's never had a full solo tour, just the dates in Australia and Japan. He takes a break and comes back with what's largely, here's another bootleg, by the way. Can't You Hear Me Rockin'? Joe Satriani was the guitarist on his solo tour, by the way. He comes back with what's largely considered his best solo album, which is this one, Wandering Spirit. Again, continuing his tradition of having horrible artwork on his covers. This is a great album, and you could find this in any used record store for really cheap. This album is worth getting the whole album. It's not perfect. And Jagger's got a tradition of the first song, like Let's Work Before. The first song on Wandering Spirit is a thing called Sweet Thing, which I think is probably the worst song on the album. It's this funky kind of a song. Again, not a big hit. Here it is on vinyl. In fact, this is red vinyl. Um, but I think it stopped the album from being a really big hit because this is a phenomenal record. And it's just loaded with great tracks. Don't Tear Me Up, which was the second single from the album, which is that one, is just an amazing track. He did a version of that on Saturday Night Live, which was just killer. He also does a great live version with Gary Moore on this thing of Everybody Knows About My Good Thing, which is the only place you can get that. But this album is loaded with great tracks. He does a really good cover of Use Me, to Bill Withers song. But this song right there, Evening Gown, go put that song on when we're done. If that song doesn't melt you, it is just the most amazing country ballad. It's incredible. But it's just a really good record. Mother of Man is a blistering rocker. Think is a great song. Hang On to Me Tonight is another great country ballad. I've Been Lonely for So Long, kind of bluesy. Angel of My Heart is kind of, you know, Elizabethan kind of harpsichord song. And then he ends it with A Handsome Molly, which is like an Irish folk song. It's just a wide variety of stuff, but it's a really solid album. Wandering Spirit, Jagger's third solo record, and highly recommended. And to promote that album, he did one solo show at Webster Hall, which is a bootleg video of which I have, which is a killer show. Bare bones at Webster Hall, and he plays Wandering Spirit with a couple of bonus tracks, Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, and Live With Me. Jagger solo is something to deal with. It's good if you give it a shot. At one point, this came out on the bootleg market called The Nature of My Game. Jagger had went into the studio for a couple days and did blues covers. And a lot of people say this is like the greatest thing in the world. They should release it. But it's okay. It's kind of like what the Stones did later on with Blue and Lonesome. But the Stones album is better, to be honest with you. Let's go into his fourth official solo record, which is this one, Goddess in the Doorway. Now, of course, when this came out, Keith Richards, as he likes to do, called it dog shit in the doorway and totally made fun of it. Another lousy album cover that Jagger always does. But for once, he got it right. The opening single was with Lenny Kravitz, and I thought he was going to be a huge hit. It's God Gave Me Everything. It didn't do much, unfortunately, but it's a blistering rocker with Lenny Kravitz. I thought it was going to be a huge hit. It wasn't. But this album also has got a lot of really good songs. Visions of Paradise is a really great track. God Gave Me Everything we just talked about. Hideaway is a really good kind of a calypso kind of a song. Too Far Gone is great. Brand New Set of Rules is really good. These albums, they're like half great and half okay. He does a duet with Bono on here called Joy, which doesn't do much for me. So again, you'll find these in the cheap record store for $3 or $4. They're well worth it. But if you take the select best songs on them, they're killer. There is one song on here which reminds me of Evening Gown. It's called Don't Call Me Up. That's the ballad on here. And Jagger does a great slide guitar solo. Don't Call Me Up, you need to hear. It's an amazing ballad. And Jagger's just great at those. So that's his fourth solo record, and there are some singles from it, Visions of Paradise, which I really like, an interview disc, and the opening single, God Gave Me Everything, which is just killer with Lenny Kravitz. That's the last of Jagger's solo albums. His solo career just hasn't taken off, and ever since then, he's done, some odd, things that he's wanted to try. Some of them are better than others. When he did that album we were just talking about, he did the B and Mick documentary, which shows him making, the the Goddess in the Doorway album, which is kind of an interesting one. And there's compilation DVDs of all his live things. But after that, what has Jagger done? Well, he did the soundtrack to Alfie, him and his partner Dave Stewart, the guy from the Eurythmics. This album really started something that bothers me about Jagger. Jagger's one of the greatest vocalists of all time when his voice is part of the sound. You know, with the Stones, it's not his voice with the Stones. His voice becomes part of the mix. At some point around this point, especially, Jagger was trying to become more of a singer. You know, like a singer. Let me do trills and let me do vibrato. And that's not Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger is one of the great rock and roll singers. And I think when he stretches himself like that, it's to the detriment of the song. Even the last Stones album, A Bigger Bang, you know, there's a couple of great songs on there that they hurt because he's just trying too much vocally. One song called Laugh I Nearly Died, which is a great song that's ruined, and to a certain extent, I think, by his vocals. But you really hear it on this album. There's some really good songs on here, but he just tries too hard. And there's a song on there, the lead song called Old Habits Die Hard, is one of the greatest things he's ever done, Jagger. It's phenomenal. But again, his vocals, it just bothers me. And some of these other songs, Blind Leading the Blind, if you listen to it, you just sometimes you almost kind of cringe. You're like, you're trying too hard. But there is a duet of Old Habits Die Hard on here with Sheryl Crow, which is really nice because she kind of takes away from some of Jagger's vocals. So that's definitely worth looking into. The best example of what I was just talking about is this project. He did this project called Super Heavy, which is a really interesting idea that he did. And it's a mixture of all different kind of music. Josh Stone was in it. And it broke my heart because when I got this album, I was like, man, this is really interesting. But the worst parts of the album is when Jagger sings because he's just trying too hard. And it's a bummer. If I listen to this album, I tend to skip over the stuff that Jagger sings lead on and listen to the other stuff because some of the other performers that make up Super Heavy are more interesting and better. But there is a song on here called Miracle Worker, which is really good. And then they finally did release this very best of Mick Jagger compilation, which was a CD and a DVD. And I don't know, you know, I just don't agree with the tracks. I mean, God Gave Me Everything is great. Put Me in the Trash is a fun song. Just Another Night, I guess you need that. Don't Tear Me Up is amazing. Charm Life was interesting. That's the only place you can find it is on here. Sweet Thing, I don't care for. Old Habits Die Hard, okay. Dancing in the Street, you don't really need. Too Many Cooks is really cool. It's a legendary bootleg track with John Lennon on there. And this is the only place to get it. There's Memo from Turner, which is amazing. Lucky in Love, great choice. Let's Work, you should burn that. Don't ever put that on here. Joy, I don't care for, even though Bono's on it. Don't Call Me Up, amazing. Checking Up on My Baby is from that bootleg that I showed you with the Red Devils, the blues CD. You Gotta Walk and Don't Look Back with Peter Tosh. And there's Evening Gown. So it's a good collection. And a lot of the tracks on there I recommended, but there's many that I recommended that were not on here. And how did they not put the DVD with Hard Woman on there? I don't know what they were thinking. So that's the very best of Mick Jagger, kind of a mixed bag. And the last thing Jagger did was this interesting thing. He released a single out of nowhere. And here is the CD version. Here's the 12-inch vinyl version. Gotta Get a Grip. I did not like this song at all. Wasn't a hit, and I understood why. It's just not that good. But the flip side is this thing called England Lost, which I just think is a great track. So that's one that I would recommend checking out as well. England Lost. On CD and vinyl right there. So that pretty much covers Mick Jagger solo. A lot of the video stuff I'm talking about is only on bootleg, and I have tons of it and the laser discs. But bottom line is that Mick Jagger solo is not great. If you buy his albums, they're not great from beginning to end, but there's tons of great stuff on them. And the most important thing to remember is he went solo to be different than the Rolling Stones. And that's what he did. And for that, I applaud him, and I enjoy his solo stuff, and I still listen to his solo stuff, and I recommend you checking it out as well. So thanks for tuning in on the Al Rosenberg Show. Please subscribe if you enjoy this. Please tell your friends to check out this guy who's making these videos on rock and roll and horror movies and laserdiscs and things like that. Hopefully they will catch on. But I hope you enjoy this, and thanks again. Have a great night.